are not based on any model, but are simply based on what stakeholder preferences are. And not a great example, but a good example to illustrate it, not a great example, but one that illustrates the point is just say no, right? We know that that doesn't really work, at least as kids get older, it doesn't work. It might work for 5th graders or 6th graders when they're sort of more in the sphere of adults' influence, but it doesn't work beyond that. So really the models that these programs that your kids are forced to sort of take, right, in school and so on and so forth, are really not based on anything sound. And that's a crime.
This is really about the war on drugs. The vast majority of this change is about the war on drugs. The policies of prohibition cause us to focus on the drugs. And by attacking the drugs, the people end up as casualties of war. Arrest, prisons, unresolved addictions, HIV, job loss, death. Health-centered policies place priority on the people.
Abstinence is a very meaningful goal for many people, and abstinence-oriented treatment has a very important role to play. So what we're really juxtaposing is a harm reduction approach to an abstinence-only approach. 58 million Americans binged on alcohol in the last month. And about 20 million meet dependence or abuse criteria. So we're talking about 60 million Americans, estimated by the federal government, are somewhere on that spectrum. If we think about the substance use not as per se impairment, but in terms of its functional impact, of its multiple meanings, of its complex role and relation for that particular person, it gets very interesting.
One of the most important things for me in my own treatment has been the sense of not being judged and having the space to talk about things that I'm so deeply ashamed of.
We don't demand that anxious patients or suicidal or depressed patients cure give up their depression and suicidality and anxiety to come to therapy. We also think about those issues as being on a spectrum of severity.
The non-judgmental, curious, sort of observing, wanting to learn about the meaning of what these behaviors mean to the individual clients and patients, and to do so in a compassionate way.
How many years, months, years does it take to create safety? And might that even be another part of actually the cure, is around the process of creating safety in relationship? Experiences that are life-threatening or even psychically life-threatening are not necessarily traumatic if there's an other there that can help someone process it.
He was also sexually abused in Puerto Rico when he was 7 years old by 2 men in their 20s who forced him to perform oral sex until he violently threw up.
We can create a space for people to bring in, I don't know if I want to give this up. I don't know what goals I have. I'm confused, I'm conflicted, I'm ambivalent. Is this a place where I can just bring myself with all of that and not have to worry about something being imposed on me or taken away from me or presumed about me? Somebody mentioned therapist shock. I think that is so key. I mean, that relates to our countertransference, and the importance of the attitude that we bring, what we convey in our responsiveness, and this is key in the first session. It can make or break, then relating to what people were wondering about, how do we get people to come back? Will they come back? Why should they come back? We have something to offer them in that first encounter that inspires a sense of trust, safety, maybe hope, possibility. We say that the so-called addict wants a quick fix, but then all of the treatment and the reimbursement for treatment, whatever, the expectations of institutions are all about quick fix. And how does quick fix make sense when we're talking about all of this complexity? How many years, months, years does it take to create safety? And might that even be another part of actually the cure, is around the process of creating safety in relationship? They said based on combined data from 2008 to 2011, they asked a group of people who were deemed to need treatment and wanted it, why didn't they access treatment? And around 40%, nearly 40% said because they didn't want to stop. If you actually have satisfaction after a couple of drinks, why not stay there? You know, why the need to keep going? We have a therapeutic relationship that's going to develop. I think we've already been talking about how that relationship is going to be highly unique. The therapist-patient match factors that contribute to therapeutic alliance may be more significant than your particular therapeutic orientation. Just think about how you can learn something much better when you've got a relationship with your teacher, your coach, your therapist, than when you're reading it from a book. There's something about the relationship that enhances the learning skills. And now we can bring these to bear on the assessment process. Assessment as treatment is actually a term that Pat Denning came up with. So that together we can now engage in this collaborative assessment of the severity of the substance use or risky behavior, of the co-occurring issues, the multiple meanings, and that becomes the stuff of therapy, the broadening and deepening. As all of these issues become more clear, we now notice that we run into ambivalence. If the client comes in pre-contemplation or contemplation, and they're not sure what their goals are, or they think that they want to moderate, and we have some doctrine about what they should do, what's that going to do to the alliance in the first session? It derails the alliance. The patient said, I'm drinking 3 bottles of wine a day, and I'm thinking about cutting back to 2. And the intake worker couldn't help herself. She sort of smirked or something. He felt devastated, humiliated, and enraged. He thought that that was a pretty good goal to have, at least to explore. How might we come to agreement about goals with patients? I'm smoking crack 7 days a week, all day long, and I'd like to cut back to 4. Can you help me do that? How might you respond to that? What I do offer is a framework for helping them answer the question about whether that's a realistic goal for them, whether that's realistic. And if we can come to agreement about that as a goal, that we can come up with some ways of exploring whether that's realistic for you, or what are realistic goals. And basically the idea is that when there are primary fundamental issues that are of more importance, or higher on the hierarchy, that need attention, people are less likely to be dealing with lower priority issues. So, like survival, like do you have a home, do you have a job, are your primary relationships being threatened? Just remember, the old model says, no, we got to deal with the addiction first. Well, homeless people that are drinking in order to deal with the terror of living on the street are unlikely to be ready to give up the alcohol, which is actually helping them to survive. We want to really get a very close, detailed sense of how the substance lives in one's life. And that's what I call the microanalysis. So I will ask them to describe their typical pattern of use over the last week, over the last month. How do you have substances in your life? And I'll ask people to tell me the story, literally. Then we can get into how does it fit into other aspects of your life. You know, when do you use? Where do you use? With whom do you use? How often? How much? The details. I'd really like to get into the details, because it's in the details that we can start to assess and begin to think about how it's fitting in, how it's functioning in relation to other aspects of one's life. We can begin to look at negative consequences. So why does it go from good to bad? If in fact 2 beers really helps you relax and unwind and connect to your friends and feel more comfortable, why do you keep drinking? And why do you keep needing more? And we've alluded to the possibility that there can be all sorts of complex dynamics where people will often say, when I'm having a glass of wine with my family, with my partner, or whatever, I'm fine. I never overdrink. But under certain circumstances, when my partner goes away, or when I'm in a certain kind of party, or when I'm in a certain kind of mood state, then I don't know what's going to happen. I can just go off the rails. And so this more specific question about change may lead to, I'd like to see if I can keep drinking in this way, and I'd like to really not overdrink in these circumstances. And then that could frame, a focus of treatment. What we want to do is bring the ambivalence, invite, as you put it, the ambivalence into the room. The conflict which is painful can itself become a motivator. So what we can do when we invite the ambivalence in is actually invite the patient to sort of dialogue, healing the dissociation, inviting all of these parts into the room so that the patient can actually have an experience of being whole in their multiplicity and their ambivalence in relation to another person. That seems to me it might be a new definition of recovery, or at least that's what we're working toward. I'm thinking that embracing ambivalence is both a motivational intervention that can promote a consideration of new goals around substance use and the related issues, but also itself a therapeutic goal that promotes a sense of integration in one's intimate relationships.
The patient said to me, I feel like all of my parts are lying here all around me. And, in this moment there was like an enormous amount of pain, and she said, like, how do I gather all of the bits up and take them with me? And I didn't know what to say. I sat with her in that moment, and, I said something about, like, how remarkable that they're finally all here in the same room. So now, like, if you have this image of sort of these, like, bits, then, like, I'm not sure, like, where we go. Like, it feels like we've gone so far, and now it's like, how do we weave them back in?
The part of the person that likes to use substances is not just a drug user. It's generally a part, or maybe there are multiple parts, if we can even take them apart a little bit, that wants to have fun, that wants adventure, that wants to be free, that wants, it is so amazing sometimes these delightful, energetic, parts that have been forgotten or thrown away come out, and now they're in the room. And then we can say, hey, wow, what a great part of you, to have rediscovered.
My outpatient, who is still really wrestling with her substance use, can frequently come into the session in a very different place every time. And I think sometimes she could do something like this, and other times it might just be like too disorganizing. And so I'm wondering, like, how you sort of weave this into the treatment. Is this something you introduce and then can return to? Do your sort of clients or patients begin to ask to engage in these voice dialogues?
she was talking about a part of herself that wants to have fun or wants to relax. And then you can shift to, so is there another part of you that's really not so comfortable? So you can just do it, weave it in to the ongoing dialogue, therapeutic dialogue. Sometimes, with some patients, maybe where you have a strong enough alliance and they're, they trust you and they're, in a relatively intact state. This can be a very powerful technique for just kind of amplifying that exploration. You can evaluate the benefits and the costs of the current pattern of use or current behavior. And there are always benefits and costs, as we've seen. But you also can evaluate in a very systematic way the benefits and the costs of the proposed or considered change. And there are benefits. If you stop drinking, you won't feel hungover and sick. But there are also costs. How else are you going to relax? How else are you going to, quiet those critical voices in your mind? And you will be surprised what you may discover by doing this with patients. You can have patients take it home. You can have them do it in groups so they can actually do decisional balances with each other. I did a decisional balance with a woman who, I've done a number of them, but with one woman who had been a cocaine user for 35 years. And she came in because her company got a new client who was going to drug test all the employees. So she had to stop. But she came to me because she was afraid that she couldn't possibly stop. And when we did the decisional balance, it was crystal clear why. In terms of the benefits of the current pattern, cocaine and alcohol were the only things that enabled her to have fun, to feel connected to people. Only, I said? The only. The rest of the time she felt panicked, petrified, dead, cut off, suicidal. So the costs were, there was one, as far as she was concerned. She might lose her job. But the benefits were, manyfold. In terms of the new pattern, that is to stop, she could only find one benefit: keep her job. And the costs were that she actually said she would feel like she would be committing suicide. That's what she said. The part of her, so this also can get at the parts work. The part of her that could come out when she was intoxicated, she was afraid she would have to kill. And if she was going to have to kill that part, she might as well kill herself. That's what she was presenting.
The process of helping someone let go isn't just focusing on the drug use, it's focusing on the idea that the drug use may be the whole problem, but really it's a symptom of the whole problem. So I feel like the focus is never, or should never, just be on the substance use behavior. So when you let go of the substance use, that's just one thing. That's one part of this overarching need for something in a person's life.
If there is no alternative, why should people give it up? I mean, if people feel like it's vital to their survival, to their pleasure, to their self-care, we don't give up defenses if we don't have something better to put in their places. If we can sit with the urge and not reinforce it with the old behaviors, and actually bring in a new solution that actually works better, works in some way. And some patients will tell you nothing works as well as crystal meth, which, the brain people will tell you, sex gives you this much pleasure and crystal meth gives you this much. That's what the brain people tell you. That's why the brain gets hijacked. But it's a different kind of pleasure. It's a more shallow or more, some people don't even like it, actually. So, but the conversation around alternatives then makes sense from the standpoint of grappling with the ambivalence. What might be an alternative response to that urge or to that discomfort? Somebody said something about distracting oneself. If you distract yourself for 20 minutes, often the urges pass, sometimes after 3 minutes. So a distraction technique. So now we can start to get into the discussion of goals and strategies. Small changes build toward other small changes. Sometimes they build to quantum change. I once had a guy in my group, he was drinking every night, and his goal was to get through one night without drinking. So we're working on all this sort of preparatory stuff and our working with the ambivalence and our micro-assessment. And one day he comes into group, he says, I haven't had a drink in 5 days. Where did that come from? That wasn't, we never talked about that. He said, well, I finally got around to the one night, and I thought, well, I'll try another night. AA says 1 day at a time. I mean, we break it down into small, manageable pieces. One step leads to the next. Driving is a metaphor. Climbing a mountain is a metaphor. There are a lot of metaphors. I love metaphors with patients. I like to say drinking, driving, skiing are all potentially lethal activities. If you don't know where you're going, how you're going to get there, and you have terrible skills, you're likely to kill yourself. We've talked before about how, the answer to the question of how do you think about your drinking is, I don't. If somebody comes in and they've been told they got to stop, and you say, well, how would you ideally like to have substances in your life? Like, what's your driving plan? What's your drinking plan? Where do you want to wind up? And how are you going to get there? If we could map that, like writing a script in fine detail, what would that look like? It both gives people permission, it puts them in the driver's seat, so to speak, it's empowering, it takes you out of the controlling position, authoritarian position, and puts them in the empowered position. And it also encourages people to really think about it in a way that maybe they never have before.
It makes sense that, when they come in for their initial assessment, they may not know if their final, ultimate, long-term goal is abstinence or moderation or what it is, but if you have skills and you know the general routes and how to get there, you can make certain decisions and take certain detours along the way if needed.
So, we could start the process to begin to do our collaborative assessment, our microanalysis, urge surf, begin to identify some goals. And then we're evaluating the goals and the plan in a hypothesis testing kind of way. Does moderation really work? Or is it a realistic goal for me? Well, if I'm having trouble, can I tweak my plan so that I can actually keep myself in a intact enough place where my judgment can work to stick to the plan? Or does any alcohol? So for example, somebody mentioned a plan with cocaine. I once had a cocaine patient who said, I love cocaine, I just don't love the fact that I get paranoid, anxious, and think I'm going to have a heart attack. He didn't want to stop though. So we figured that he might be using too much cocaine. So we actually did a plan, an experiment, whereby he used smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller lines, and we were kind of evaluating the pleasure-anxiety balance. And he got to the point where he just did a tiny little bump, and he still got anxious. And then he realized he didn't love cocaine, he loved the idea of cocaine. And then he felt more motivated to quit. Play with the habit rather than enforce it. And see what happens. Remember smoke enders, they used to say, take your cigarette pack, put it in a different pocket. Urge surf for 5 seconds. Just play with it. Your habit wants to do it, mess with the habit a little bit. Then you can do it if you want to. But you're just kind of dislodging the automatic aspect a little bit. You're bringing mindfulness in. Bring it in more. Bring it in more. Sometimes you can urge surf for 5 seconds, 5 minutes, and one day you're urge surfing for 24 hours. And then another 24 hours. Keep going, see how far you can go. Say stop and hold your breath. It quiets, gives you a moment of pause, and then slowly exhale. And now you've disrupted this automatic chatter, automatic habits. But if you really don't want to use, and you don't have something in your house, at least the part of you that doesn't want to use, decides to keep it out of the house, you have a little more time to think about it when you have the urge. If you're at a party and somebody says, hey man, can I get you a beer? Or you want to do some shots with us? And you've said yes for the last 30 times, what do you say? So if you actually practice, you know what you're going to say. No thanks, I'm on antibiotics, or I've had enough, or some kind of repertoire that actually helps you meet that moment. Plan. The game plan. The Giants don't always win, but they have a game plan. It increases the chances of winning. You've anticipated, you've planned, you've come up with some analysis of the challenges and come up with some ideas about solutions. So we talk with patients every single time they're going into a challenging situation about your game plan. Beforehand, what's your intention? How do you hope to get through the day, the night? Lifestyle modification is the other part of relapse prevention. If the drug or the problematic behavior sort of takes up your entire life, and then you want to take it out or reduce it, there's huge gaps in people's lives, in areas that have withered. So thinking about repairing a lifestyle, reinvigorating parts of the life that have been lost.